Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. President Donald Trump has welcomed Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan to the White House for the first time since 2019, signaling a potential reset in U.S.-Turkey relations. Now, with defense deals, regional conflicts, and energy policies on the table, the meeting could carry implications far beyond bilateral ties, particularly for Central and Eastern Europe and Ukraine as well. Joining us today on TVP World is Adam Michalski, Research Fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies, specializing in Turkey and a wider region. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. So, can you help us paint a picture of how significant this visit is for Erdoğan to return to the White House under President Trump, and what message does that send to U.S. and its allies?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a big happening for Turkey to return to the White House after 4 or 5 years of not being able under Joe Biden's administration to achieve that meeting. One would call it perhaps historic. At the same time, the meeting itself perhaps was under par from what people have expected. We've had a brief discussion with Donald Trump and Erdoğan on some of the issues that they're going to touch upon. This included topics like returning to the F35 jet program that Turkey was removed from after it acquired the S-400 missile launch systems from Russia. There were talks about F-16, which Turkey is willing to acquire. But aside from that, there was, I think, a lot of smaller talks regarding some bilateral issues, regarding some Turkish banks, which are under sanctions from the United States for evading sanctions on Iran, and some type of minor issues concerning Turkey and Greece relations. But in general, I mean, there's definitely been a big agenda because there has been a lot of issues between Turkey and the United States. The F-35 is the primary and the most important one. But for example, removing the Caucasus sanctions, which the United States has imposed on Ankara after acquiring the S-400 missile system, is yet another contentious issue that Turkey hasn't been able to resolve with Washington. And so the meeting with Erdoğan and Trump was supposed to at least tackle these topics. And we know that they have discussed these issues. But we haven't received any type of communication, both from the Turkish side and the United States, with regards to the outcomes of these discussions, which, of course, does shine at least an orange light saying, well, did they actually achieve anything? So I think that the message here is, for now, is that definitely a lot of issues were raised, but it remains to be seen how far these talks have actually managed to move some of those topics in a direction where we could see them being resolved in the near future. And that, I think, is something that we'll be learning about in the next couple of days.
Right, and speaking of some of the big agenda you mentioned, F-35 is something that is perhaps on the forefront of a lot of these discussions. President Trump has also floated the idea of potentially letting Turkey back on the program. And my question would be, are there any other trade-offs, seeing Trump being very transactional when it comes to dealing with foreign policies? What exactly is Washington trying to get for dangling the F-35 shaped carrot in front of Erdoğan?
Well, I mean, I think that the F-35 is a little bit separate issue compared to perhaps some other of this stuff. I mean, the F-35 is a topic that has been going on for a couple of years. Turkey is able to resume any type of dialogue with Washington on the matter of returning to the F-35 program. And for Turkey, this was very important because a lot of their military strategy, for example, new warships which are being built, were built with mind with the F-35, and the fact that some of these variants have vertical takeoff capability, which Turkey, as a result, because it was removed from the program, is no longer able to acquire. So this, as a result, disrupts some of the Turkish defense plans. And this is why Turkey really, really wants to return to this program. And Trump realizes that this is essentially a card that he can play a card that he can perhaps use to extract from Turkey some concessions. The number one, of course, topic is the S-400, which is conditional on Turkey returning to the F-35 program. Turkey has to get rid of these Russian defense system. It has to provide a clear letter outlining that it's not going to be willing to acquire them anytime in the future, and give the United States guarantees. And I mean, the topic has been going on for ages right now. Could Turkey do it? Perhaps they could find a middle ground when it comes to that. And this is something that Turkey wants from Donald Trump to perhaps reconsider, give them an option and a way out so that they could return to the F-35 program. But on the other hand, we have also other issues. For example, the fact that Donald Trump raised the topic of Turkey importing Russian oil and gas, which is something that has been very controversial when it comes to Turkey's side. Turkey has definitely, due to the fact that it's one of the biggest importers of Russian gas and oil, has contributed to Putin's war coffers by financing essentially this war through the energy means. And this is something that Donald Trump would like to see end. But the reality of the fact is that Turkey has no other real alternative for cheap natural gas other than Russia. And they're just about to sign a big contract for the next couple of decades when it comes to importing Russian gas. So these type of demands from Trump are very hard to swallow. It's probably more likely that Turkey could perhaps limit some of its oil imports from Russia. Turkey imports a lot of that oil and then refines it in its own country and then resells it as its own. So perhaps this is something that Turkey could tackle. But I mean, the general idea and kind of consensus that people have from this meeting is that there are a lot of kind of those touchy topics that Erdoğan didn't necessarily want to hear being raised up. And I mean, energy is one of the big ones because it's a huge source of revenue for the Turkish state. But at the same time, it's a topic which is very hard to talk about on how to scale down Turkish imports of this energy when they're making a lot of money on that.
All right. Well, President Trump actually explained that Turkey, one of the largest importers of Russian oil, can somehow source oil elsewhere. And he also made the statement that if he, meaning President Trump, wants Erdoğan to do it, he believes that it will stop. Do you think that's an overly ambitious statement when it comes to Turkey's capability of staving off Russian energy?
Well, I think that this is going to be definitely one of those contentious issues, as I mentioned. I mean, it's not that Turkey doesn't have alternatives to Russian oil. I mean, oil is relatively easy to transport. That isn't the biggest problem. The issue is that Turkey's getting a really good price on that Russian oil, and it's getting a price far below the market value which other nations in Europe buy. And this is why Turkey is capable of generating profits through refining that Russian oil, majority of which it's not capable of using itself. So I think that, this is going to be the tough pill that perhaps President Erdoğan might have to swallow when it comes to, having Trump willing to continue on discussing with him some of the other more important stuff, like the F-35, which we have talked about. So this remains, I think, a topic that has to be weighed. I think that Trump can believe that he has this ability to convince leaders to do what he wants, but I think that Erdoğan also has the ability to show people that he has his own way of doing stuff. So this is something that I think in the next couple of months will be very interesting to observe and to see whether Turkey will comply with some of these demands made by Trump, or whether it will decide that it's too costly for them, and perhaps we're going to see this kind of stalemate that we have seen right now continue on for long into the next couple of years.
There's also reports about recent purchase of 225 Boeing aircrafts from the United States. Do you think that also have anything to do with Erdoğan trying to get on Trump's good graces, or do you think there were any trade-off when it comes to this particular deal being made?
Yeah, I mean, the Boeing aircrafts are definitely a ticket for Erdogan to meet with President Trump. And this is something that has been, of course, highly contested in Turkish media, that essentially Erdogan is selling himself out just to, go to the White House and speak to Trump. There, of course, has been, I think, a LNG deal between Turkey and the United States. So this is another example where Turkey has committed to buy American goods. And I think that this is more for Trump, so that Trump can walk out of this deal, of these discussions that he had with Erdogan, and say, look, we are bringing, Turkey is buying our stuff, they're signing contracts with us. But for Turkey, that essentially, it's a huge investment. And the question is, will it pay off in terms of, Trump being willing to speak with Turkey and continue these hard discussions on the military topics, which are controversial, and most likely, we won't see an immediate effect of Trump's grace and praise for Erdogan happening anytime soon, especially that he has already given Erdogan a short message, or at least to the media, saying that the F-35 is on the table, but he wants Erdogan to complete a specific task before that. And the question, of course, is, what is that specific task? Is that, as I've mentioned, Turkey getting rid of the S-400, because that topic on its own is a massive task, and this is something that could drag on these relations and problems between Turkey and the United States for years to come still.
Right, and we're also curious about Trump's statement about working with Erdogan together to end the war in Ukraine. What kind of plan do you think that would entail, and how can Turkey contribute realistically to whatever Trump's plan would be to try to put a halt to the war?
I mean, it is obvious that Turkey has been praised by Donald Trump for the fact that it's been one of the NATO member states that had relatively good relations with Russia, good relations with Ukraine, and was able to find this kind of middle ground as a mediator, trying to bring both of the sides together. And this is something that Trump wants to see, because he wants to end the war. This was one of his main kind of goals during his campaign. And of course, we know that this war isn't coming to a close anytime soon. So Trump definitely needs Erdogan on his side when it comes to the war in Ukraine. He wants definitely Erdogan to do as much as he can in order to bring the warring sides to some form of a negotiating table, and perhaps a ceasefire, maybe somewhere down the road, even peace. But let's be also honest. Erdogan isn't the big player here on the table. Russia is the one which currently is dictating the rules. And as long as Russia doesn't want to necessarily end this conflict, whatever Erdogan offers to Trump as his assistance in the war isn't necessarily going to lead to anything. So this is kind of the age-old problem that we've been facing, that the problem of ending this war isn't the issue of finding states which are willing to mediate. It's the problem of Russia willing to continue that war because it doesn't want to end it. And this isn't something that Erdogan can end by himself. And even Trump has shown that even with meeting with Putin, he's not able to achieve anything much more other than just continued escalation, particularly on the NATO eastern border.
Right. So we'll have to see how this meeting would have any sort of ripple effect going forward. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But stay tuned for more on TVP World.